On this edition of Independent Sources, partnership or paternalism? Does France's increased presence in Africa during conflicts in Libya and Côte d'Ivoire signal a return to its colonial past?
Suicide watch. Recent figures refocus attention on a long-standing problem in the Latino community.
And fat kids. Obesity among inner-city youth may not be just a matter of eating too much junk food.
Welcome to Independent Sources. I'm Abby Ashola.
And I'm Viano Ravinka. France has been making headlines recently as the country took the lead in resolving conflicts in Libya and Côte d'Ivoire. This has prompted some international observers to question whether or not this is a precursor to the country returning to a time when Paris dictated policies to its colonies.
The French president, Nicolas Sarkozy, has responded sharply to these criticisms, saying neither interference nor indifference.
But there are still those who think that Paris is grappling for footing on the continent. I sat down with political analysts Niaka Lagoke and Emmanuel Saint-Martin of France 24 to talk about whether this is a new era of partnership or paternalism between France and Africa. The reactions in the international media to the French intervention have been all over the map, ranging from praising France's assertiveness to calling the intervention suspicious, as in the case of the international news agency IPS. Niaka, it seems that Libyans have generally welcomed the international, including the French intervention, but what about Ivorians? What's the mood within the Ivory Coast?
Thank you very much. If we believe that the results of the election were true, it means that at least 46% of Ivorians did not appreciate the intervention of France. And I can tell you, based on the mood on the ground, that at least half of the population, or even a little bit higher than that, did not appreciate what we can call the intervention or the invasion of France in the Ivory Coast to dislodge former President Laurent Gbagbo.
Emmanuel, there's a debate within France on the French intervention in the Ivory Coast, while there's strong support for the intervention in Libya. Tell us more about the reactions within France.
Yeah, there is clearly a debate, and it has a lot to do with the history of France in this part of the world, in this part of Africa, and especially with Ivory Coast. Every action of France is suspicious and has to be suspicious in a way, because to be looked at in a suspicious manner, because of course there is a history and a trend of intervention for interest purposes, for the own interest of France in those countries. But you have in front of that, so a lot of people are voicing those kind of concerns, saying, here we are at it again, intervening again in a foreign country, intervening again in an African country, and trying to decide who is going to rule that country, as we did in many African countries. But in front of that, you have people like Sarkozy, the French president, and a lot of other people who are saying, we cannot stand by and looking at yet another massacre and yet another bloodbath in this region. In a lot of French minds, there is the precedent and the history of Rwanda in '94, where basically the French troops and the French politicians didn't do anything to stop what was going on in Rwanda and the genocide that happened then afterwards. So there is also this idea that we had to do something, and maybe France was not the ideal power to do that, and because of the history, but they had the troops on the ground, and they were able to do something and to try to do something, and they had to. And Sarkozy and the French government has been really reluctant to intervene and to intervene on the ground with French troops. They tried not to do that. They were trying, in the background to do something, but they were trying not to put boots on the ground. They had to do it.
Well, Nyaka, what about this argument that Sarkozy was forced to intervene in some ways because there were French troops on the ground in the Ivory Coast, and the UN actually had to appeal to the French to intervene in the standoff between the two presidential candidates?
I think that people want to be too clement for Sarkozy. The French president wants to put France back on the map of the world, and he believes that by doing neo-colonial interventions in Libya, in Ivory Coast, in other countries in the world, where he doesn't control the president, he thinks that that's the best way, to give a kind of grandeur to France. We did oppose the intervention of the United Nations in the Ivory Coast because it is not the duty of the United Nations and France to promote war in African countries. And this problem could have been solved differently, but instead, they wanted to do that in order to show some muscle. And of course, many civilians were killed while they were saying that they wanted to go there to protect civilians.
It's worth noting that Gbagbo was one of the people who agreed to the role given to the United Nations in the election, and the fact that they were going to say who was the winner of the election. Gbagbo, there was an agreement a few years ago, and Gbagbo won one of the people who signed the agreement, saying yes, the United Nations is going to play this role, certifying the results of the election, and then of course, the result was not in his favor, and then he changed his mind, basically. But even if you can be critic of the role that France played and the United Nations played, you have to remind that Laurent Gbagbo and other Ivorian people are actually at the heart of the problem, and actually did what are the cause of what happened in his last few months in Ivory Coast.
Nyaka?
Gbagbo is not perfect, and Gbagbo made some mistakes. And in many of my interviews, I have shown that some of the dissension I have with Gbagbo. When Gbagbo called the United Nations years ago, when he called the French troops years ago, I was one of the people who were saying that Gbagbo Laurent made a mistake. So it's not because today they intervened and they did what they do, then we're going to say, okay, Gbagbo is the one who called them, so it is right. Gbagbo made a mistake on that front. When Nigeria in 2002 wanted, to help Gbagbo defeat the rebels, France did intervene to ask Gbagbo not, to take the help from Nigeria. When Laurent Gbagbo asked France, to help him defeat the rebels, they said that it was an internal affair. And in 2004, 69 Ivorians were killed by the French troops. More than 1,000 tanks, French tanks, moved towards the presidential palace to try and overthrow Gbagbo. They did not succeed in 2004, and this time they did it. This is the reality. So what we saw, neo-colonialism, and there is no way I'm going to hear another side of the story.
Emmanuel, tell me more about the debate within France, because as we said in the beginning, there are people who don't support the military involvement because it does resemble too much past interventions by France in its former colony.
Yeah, absolutely, and especially on the left, maybe of the political landscape, you find more people saying that we shouldn't have gone in the first place, and we shouldn't have intervened in Ivory Coast because there is always only losses inside for France. I mean, there is nothing to gain from intervening in Ivory Coast and in Africa. And in a way, that's also what Sarkozy and his camp is saying about that. They're saying we're not there for our business interests because our business interests are way down, and we're not the main power anymore in this region of the world. We are not there for political reasons. We are there because we had to try to do something and prevent civilians to be killed, because that's basically what happened in the last few months and few weeks. A lot of civilians got killed.
He had very close ties to President Ouattara. Could that be a factor in the intervention also?
it has to be a factor that in the way that it might be a more, it might have more trust in Ouattara than had in Gbagbo. But he used to be close to Gbagbo too, and France used to be close to Gbagbo, and Gbagbo was very close to France at one point. Everybody is saying now that Gbagbo is always anti-French, but he has not always been anti-French, and he called the French to come to his help many times, and he has a very strong history and in his personal history of relationship with the French.
Yes, Nyaka?
Sarkozy is close to Ouattara. Sarkozy is more comfortable, in having somebody like Ouattara who represents Eurocentric values, who works at the IMF, who studied here, and who is married to a French lady. On the other hand, I can say that France, under Chirac, under Sarkozy, did tolerate Gbagbo. It doesn't mean that they wanted to do great business with him. So because they don't control him, and even if Gbagbo himself, like Martin said, Gbagbo wanted to have different type of relationship with France. He is not anti-French, but I think France declared a war to Gbagbo regime, and that's why we saw ourselves in the predicament we just experienced recently.
And we have to wrap the discussion here. Gentlemen, thank you very much for being in studio with us today. Emmanuel Saint-Martin and Nyaka Lagoke, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
When we come back, Latina suicides. How is this growing problem being addressed in some communities?
Before that, Jessica Cordemanche has some other news.
Thanks, Vianora. Here's a look at some headlines from the ethnic media. From AfricaNews.com, Nigerians elected a new president on Saturday in a relatively peaceful setting. The leading candidates in the race for presidency were incumbent Goodluck Jonathan and former military head of state, General Muhammadu Buhari. Physical violence and vote rigging had marred previous elections in the West African country. The website reports that this time around, there was heavy security around the headquarters of the Electoral Commission in Lagos. Voting began on time across the country, and voters were encouraged to wait behind and witness the public ballot count. El Diario La Prensa reports that cuts to New York public libraries could negatively affect the city's immigrants. Mayor Bloomberg's budget proposal could mean the closure of more than 36 libraries and the reduction of hours of services in many others. The immigration commissioner of the city and the directors of libraries in Brooklyn, Queens, and New York say that the libraries are important because of services they provide to immigrants. These include free English classes and tutoring sessions. The Amsterdam News reports that an anti-war and anti-Islamophobia rally was held in Union Square. The United National Anti-War Committee organized the event. It featured 500 organizations from around the country, including the Muslim Peace Coalition and the Islamic Leadership Council of Metropolitan New York. According to the newspaper, the Muslim Peace Coalition is the first national organization created to promote peace, respect, and understanding of Muslims and Islam. From the Filipino Reporter, the Philippines-United States war games started last week. Members of the armed forces of the Philippines and U.S. service members participated in Exercise Balikatan 2011, the 27th Balikatan War Games. The joint exercise is a way to prepare both forces to face future military challenges, including traditional man-made conflicts as well as natural calamities. The number of U.S. soldiers who were to participate was cut in half to 3,000. The other half had initially committed to the Games, but were deployed for relief operations in Japan following March's earthquake. And finally, Italian Harlem festivities. The Italian Tribune reports that the East Harlem reunion will be held at the end of this month. Back in the 1930s and 40s, East Harlem was home to the largest Italian village in New York City. The reunion is a celebration for Italian Americans who had ties to the neighborhood. This year, the event will honor Anna Barone, who established the reunion in 2005 and passed away last year. Those were just a few headlines from the ethnic media. Back to Abby and Vianora in the studio.
Thanks, Jessica. A recent El Diario La Prensa headline, La Marca del Suicidio, a mark of suicide, refocused attention on the issue in the Latino community. The story was pegged to figures from the Centers for Disease Control, CDC, that showed that 1 in 6 Latinas attempted suicide between the ages of 11 and 17.
The issue is not new. Some researchers have called the phenomenon a suicidal fit from way back in the late 50s.
So why are these numbers so startling to many, and what is being done to address this grim reality? I spoke with Andrew Kuntz and William Murray, who work for an organization trying to address the issue in the Bronx, and Elaine Rivera, who has reported on the trend. Elaine, I'll start with you. The number of suicide attempts are highest among Latinos, particularly Latinas, and this issue isn't new. You reported on it back in 2006. Why are so many Latinas attempting to commit suicide?
Well, it's a phenomenon that's been taking place for a long time. As we were talking earlier, Luis Zayas saw this in the 70s. You know, young Latinas being admitted to emergency rooms. It's a confluence of factors. It's cultural. It's clashes with family members. It's young women who feel totally alienated. They're living in 2 different cultures. They're living in a very liberated society, but they have to adhere to their parents' traditional cultural mores. And you know, I would like to preface it with, like, many Latinas are thriving. They're doing well, but usually this is first-generation Latinas, and it's a socioeconomic factor too. So you know, parents who don't really know how to raise their children in this culture where it totally clashes with their belief system where they came from.
Why are so many people startled by this issue? It's not a new topic.
Well, it hasn't really been reported on, and now, but the numbers keep coming out showing the same pattern over and over and over again. I think the most recent data shows that among Latinas, 15% have teenage Latinas have attempted suicide, versus much lower numbers for Black young women and white young women.
Okay, and Will, in 2009 and 2010, Astor Services saw a higher number of more serious suicide attempts among the people that you service. What are you guys doing to correct that?
Well, one of the things that we've done is we've made some organizational changes to improve clients' access to care. And one of the things we've done is actually create what we call open access. What open access basically is, it allows us to serve the client the same day that they come into the clinic. So they can either walk in, or they can do a referral by phone, and they can come in that day or the next day. They do some very brief paperwork, and they're able to see an intake clinician get started on treatment. So that's really helped us make sure that clients are able to be seen immediately as they want to, whether it's a crisis going on or something that's been going on for some time in the school and the family. They're able to come right in and be seen immediately.
Okay, Elaine, going back to Latinas, what are some of the stresses that they're experiencing?
Well, one is sex education. They don't talk about sex education in many Latino families. And I think it's like a psychologist I quoted in my series of stories. She said, parents believe that if you don't talk about sex, your child won't have sex. Well, you know, we know that's not the case. So they get pregnant, and then they have to drop out of high school. And there's tremendous pressure for young Latinas to be caretakers, especially the older siblings, young Latinas. There's tremendous pressure for them to take care of their younger siblings. They have to take care of their, you know, while their parents are at work, they have to take care of their brothers and sisters. They don't have the freedom that the average American teenager has, like going to movies, you know, going out. They can't have sleepovers. You know, so there is this clash of cultures that's taking place, and they are being pushed to be adults way beyond their years.
Wow.
And so, you know, and also it's many issues, language, feeling like they live in 2 different worlds. The world that their parents grew up in, they don't understand it. You know, many of them are English dominant versus their parents. And, you know, it's just, you know, a tremendous clash.
Okay. And Andrew, I know you guys have headquarters in the Bronx. What are you guys doing to work with the Latino community there to correct the issue?
Well, we have actually two locations. One is in the North Bronx on Tilden Street, and the other's in the Highbridge section of the Bronx. One of our initiatives is called Clinic Plus, and we send screeners into the middle schools in the neighborhood. And we do some simple screening tools to be able to identify those kids who are at risk. Once they are identified, then we will contact the parents to see if they would like an evaluation so that we can further determine whether their child needs services or not.
And what are experts saying are the root causes of suicide and suicide attempts?
Well, depression is by and large the most prevalent factor in teenage suicide. About half of the children who are identified as depressed are going to go on and have a suicide attempt. And of those children who do attempt suicide, about 7% actually commit suicide.
And Elaine, is that supposed hesitance to therapy and counseling, is that an issue with Latinas?
Yes, well, it's a stigma in the Latino community. And one of the things I pointed out in my series of stories is that many parents say, well, if you go to a mental health therapist, they say, you're not crazy, go to church, pray, or go talk to your cousin. But there is a huge stigma about seeking therapy, mental health therapy, because you're seen as crazy, which is, you know, so not true. But, you know, that's something that has to be, you know, where the Latino community has to be educated that there's nothing wrong to go see a mental health therapist. And, you know, these young women, they're afraid. They're just really afraid because they don't want to get the, you know, wreak the wrath of their parents. And so they don't seek the help that they really need.
Andrew, are you finding that's an issue at Astor?
That's one of the issues. When we do an evaluation, we do it on several different levels. Certainly the cultural aspect is extremely important, but there's also family issues too. Some families are more flexible, some families are more rigid. So we also assess the family functioning. And then finally, there's the individual functioning. I mentioned that the presence of a mental illness significantly increases the risk for suicide. There's other risks too that are involved, including how acculturated the child is, whether there's been any traumas in the background, whether there has been a past history of suicide attempts, all of which increase the risk.
And Will, have you seen numbers increase in terms of the people attempting suicide?
I can't speak to that, definitely. We have seen, though, an increase of individuals, Latino families, coming to our clinics and seeking our services. And so that's been very, very positive. Families reaching out, and we've been able to establish relationships with families in key and important areas, especially around our Highbridge Clinic area as well.
Okay.
I could speak to that a little bit.
Okay.
Is that luckily there is about a 25% reduction over the last decade of teenage suicide. And as Elaine said, the stigma has been an issue in the Latino community that is reducing somewhat. We are seeing families who are more willing to bring their kids in for an evaluation, more willing to be guided by the school or by significant adults who would recommend an evaluation and actually coming in for an evaluation. So we do see a bit of a lessening of that. And because of that, our numbers have gone up for screening and referral.
Well, that's all the time we have for this discussion. Andrew Kuntz, William Murray, and Elaine Rivera, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, Abby.
Thank you.
Still to come on Independent Sources, why is the problem of obesity among inner-city children a more complicated story than we think?
And finally tonight, just a few weeks ago, New York City Council members took fast food companies to task, calling for a ban on promotions that included toys in their kids' meals. This raised the issue of who's to blame for the problem of childhood obesity in the U.S., parents or the children themselves.
Experts are now looking at the environment, especially the media environment, where food industry commercials and ads entice kids to eat more, undermining their parents' food choices.
Judith Escalona reports that in the fight over who decides what's for breakfast in lunchboxes and on the dinner table, parents may be losing ground despite their best efforts.
American children are the heaviest they've ever been. 30 years ago, 5.7% of the U.S. population between the ages of 6 and 17 were fat. Today, it's nearly 3 times that number. Marion Nessel, a nutritionist and author of several works on the U.S. food industry, explains why.
Children are fat because they're eating too much. It's as simple as that. Body weight is a matter of calories in and calories out, and kids today are highly sedentary and eating a lot of junk food.
Nessel says this isn't a coincidence. Our children are eating more because they've been deliberately targeted by the food industry.
These children are bombarded with them now. They watch hundreds and thousands of commercials for foods, and in the electronic age, they're reached in ways that parents can't even imagine. All of them designed to get kids to recognize a brand, to ask their parents for the brand, and to believe that they're supposed to eat foods that are made just for them, kids' foods, and not eat what their parents eat.
I gotta get the tricks!
It's the rabbit! Silly rabbit!
Trick cereal, part of a good breakfast.
Only if you're a kid.
And I think this last is so subversive of parental authority around food issues that it's reason enough to be really concerned about food marketing to children.
Fast food and breakfast cereal companies have reacted to increased public scrutiny by marketing their brands as healthy. However, Nessel says they're not.
Whole grain and calcium guaranteed? Oh, come on, give me a break. This is a regular sugary breakfast cereal aimed at kids.
We tried to get both General Mills and McDonald's to respond to these claims. General Mills declined. McDonald's, after initially responding, never returned our calls. Some researchers in New York City are finding that things get even more complicated in low-income communities. Dr. Mayra Galvez is the director of the Pediatric Environmental Health Specialty Unit at Mount Sinai Hospital. They've been conducting a long-term study on childhood obesity among African American and Latino children in East Harlem.
We had research assistants actually map East Harlem for both food stores and physical activity resources. And then we looked at the types of food stores that were within a block and a half of the school and found that many of those schools actually had as many as 11 to 20 unhealthy food stores just within a block and a half of that school. So kids have ample access to unhealthy food stores, and not surprisingly, they reported that fast food chains were one of the most frequented places.
But besides poor eating habits, experts agree that children today are more sedentary. They're sitting at home playing electronic games or surfing the web rather than jumping rope or roller skating. Dr. Galvez's team found other reasons why children stay at home in East Harlem.
A major pressure in inner city settings is concerns about safety. And I think that's a pressure that unfortunately keeps children inside in their apartments where parents are comfortable in terms of their safety. And it's really important for kids to get time outdoors, exposure to the natural environment.
Concerned citizens and critics are looking more closely at how children are being manipulated through TV, the web, and electronic gadgets. And they're striking back.
Look how big that French fry is.
With documentaries like Morgan Spurlock's Super Size Me and ad campaigns against fast foods, sugary drinks, and cereals. Even the French are weighing in with their own gory ad. I'm Judith Escalona for Independent Sources.
That's our show this week. Thanks for staying tuned.
Till next time, be independent-minded.